Hello, I'm Claudia Acevedo, and this is going to be a social studies example. I'm going to show you how I put together a rubric for my world history project. So what we see here is a project rubric template that you're going to be using from your project planning form. And I'm going to be showing you one that's creating the same process in the same place. So here's my sample, and it's already been filled out. I'm going to walk us through it. But before I do, I want to go back and show you my driving question. So this project has a driving question and a broad driving question. This is my driving question up here. So how can we as student leaders help student council create a democratic constitution that establishes and secures the rights and responsibilities of every member of our school community? So the students are going to be putting together and proposing a brand new constitution for their school community. Our broad driving questions here, I just have two for now. I'm brainstorming those still, but how does a community or nation establish and secure the rights of the people? And what responsibilities do individuals have in a community? Okay. For this particular project, the product is up here. There's a place for you to write your product. And so they are going to be creating a presentation of a student-designed democratic constitution for our school. Now, that may look like a multimedia presentation. They might have some slides to go with it. They might make a poster instead. They're going to decide what they have to present orally to student council. Okay. And so for this, we're going to follow the steps here. Number one, in the column on the left, list out the standards that you're covering. So I did that first. And so my standards are here. I have 19A, 20A, 20B, 21A, and 21B. And so the student will be expected to explain the development of democratic republican government from its beginnings in Judeo-Christian legal tradition and classical Greece and Rome through the French Revolution. 20A, the student is expected to describe how people have participated in supporting or changing their government. 20B, citizenship, the student is expected to describe the rights and responsibilities of citizens and non-citizens in civic participation throughout history. 21A, the student is expected to summarize the development of the rule of law from ancient to modern times. And the last one is here, citizenship. The student is expected to identify the origins of ideas regarding the right to a trial by jury of your peers and the concepts of innocent until proven guilty and equality before the law from sources including the Judeo-Christian legal tradition and in Greece and Rome. So let's go back to our steps. Number 2 says start with the proficient column, then move to the others. And this is really optional. Some people do it different ways, but I do like to look at proficient and try and make sure that what my students are going to have to do and the level that they're going to have to perform at is at the level of the standard. And so I made sure that the verbs would translate into that same level from the standard. So my students will have to explain this development. They'll have to describe what different people have done in the past. They'll have to describe what rights and responsibilities citizens versus non-citizens would have. They have to summarize that development of that rule of law and how it's developed throughout history, and they have to identify the origins of these ideas. And so here in their presentation, they have to briefly explain the following features of ancient Greek and Roman democracy using the students' own words. And to me, that's very important. They can't just restate the information from in the way they read it in a textbook or on a website. It has to be in their own words. And these are the different sections of democracy and of government that I want them to stop and think about. So what legislative group or council exists? What does it do? What kind of decisions does it make? How does it work? How big is it? Justice system, are there rules? Are there laws that people, when they violate, things happen? And so they have to figure out what did the ancient Greeks and Romans have and be able to explain that. A few other citizenship requirements and duties of what does it take to be considered a citizen, and how can you lose your citizenship, or what do you have to do to be a good citizen? What are those duties? And then how do they select their leaders and who gets to succeed as a leader, and what is the process there? What are the rights in doing that, and who gets to do that? Okay, and then their presentation is going to list examples from American democracy. So now we're looking at okay, we're taking something from the past and it's developed into what we have in the United States. So they're going to look at American democracy and be able to list some examples and explain which historical feature it borrows ideas from to include each of these legal traditions. And so I want to make sure they have gone back and pulled, okay, what did I find came from Judeo-Christian tradition, ancient Greece, and ancient Rome. The third one here is slides, posters, speaker notes, or whatever they produce or other student created materials will correctly use 6 or more of the historical vocabulary terms. Every project, every content topic, I always provide a list of vocabulary terms, concepts, words that they're going to stumble upon, words that we're going to have to match, put together, figure out how do they fit into the context of what we're researching, and be able to use those same words in their work and certainly in their presentation. So that's proficient for me. And then I'm going to take a look at either before they came to me or before we did this project, what are some of the skills that I want them to come with? What is some of the content I expect them to have already learned? Or what are some of the things that I know that they typically will do when they're struggling? And those are the things that I want to be able to put under emerging, where a struggling learner or someone who's just scratching the surface might be at before they actually reach the level of a standard. Okay, so that's where we're going to build our descriptors using Bloom's taxonomy or standards from grades either below, or above, or below. And that's going to give us some of the language for emerging and for advanced. Let's look at emerging. So if the presentation restates notes from class, but does not take it further to apply the information to our school setting, that's going to be someone that's emerging. And I've taught this content many, many times. I've done projects, different projects with this content. And just in general, in project-based learning, students typically will start thinking that they can just restate information from the textbook, or that whatever I said in a workshop or a lecture or in my presentation of facts and information, they just kind of put it back together again in a different way, but it's not really applying any of their knowledge. They're just restating it again. It's almost just repeated from what was in the notes. And if they do that in a project, then they're certainly going to be considered emerging if they didn't do anything to show that they thought about the content. So that's why that's under emerging. Students show an understanding of our school's current state through information about these structures and representations of student civic life. So this is a very authentic project. And in an authentic project, the students are going to have to figure out, what am I actually doing? What problem is there that I'm solving? Okay, they have to understand the problem, and then they have to figure out all of the solutions they're going to implement for that problem. So in this situation, they're going to be implementing or persuading others, or proposing a new constitution for the student council. And so I want them to wrap their mind around our school and really think about, what do I see in my school as being something that involves decision making, something that involves student voice, or just decisions about students? What are the rules that exist, the duties that students have, and teachers, and really anyone that's in our building? So first of all, they're going to have to research a lot of that. Just look at their surroundings and gather bits and pieces in their teams about the things that we already have at school before they can suggest changes. So because of that, I want them to research some of that information. Some of that information they already know. They can just go ahead and brainstorm the list, kind of put it all up on a chart paper and brainstorm what are the problems that we see here. So they are going to be tackling some of that on their own very easily, and then some they'll have to research. So if they turn in their project at the end of this whole project and their presentation includes that, that's great. They're still emerging if they don't have some of the history. So that's why this falls under emerging, because it's information that they already have in their surroundings. And I'm just asking them to open their eyes, investigate a little bit, talk to their some of their teachers, talk to maybe some people in student council. Some of them are in student council, some of them already can be chatting with each other and figuring out some of this information, but they will have to include that information in their presentation. Just briefly, what do student council meetings entail? We have a thing called houses, which is like advisory. Circle time. That's an opportunity for a lot of school spirit and a lot of activities and information, and it's a place for students to find out about things, and it really connects everyone. So is that something that exists that allows for student voice and participation? Is that an important integral piece that they can suggest different articles in their constitution can entail these? Parent involvement committee is one that they know very little about, so I wanted them to know that it does exist, and maybe there's something there for us to include in their constitution, something in regards to the parent involvement committee. The student clubs, what are they? How do they develop their own decisions? And is there a leader in these groups? And how do these leaders get chosen? All right, 3, students restate basic facts from research about Greek and Roman democracy, such as dates, names, and concepts without much detail. So typically students go to a website and find out, okay, what is Greek democracy? And a lot of this information is very easy to find. And so with project-based learning, we want to make sure that they aren't just getting facts. If they're just getting facts, then, well, Wikipedia can do just as well. So I want them to be able to be ready for the 21st century, be ready for the world, and do something with those facts and think about those facts. So if all they have are just some facts, some dates, and just kind of hodgepodge mess of facts, and that sometimes are just factoids and sometimes are trivial, then that's emerging. That's really not hitting the standard. Number 4, comparisons between types of democracy are only repeated from the information in texts, articles, or websites. So many textbooks have comparisons of Greek democracy, Roman democracy, sometimes even American democracy. There are Venn diagrams out there. They're easy to find. All of that is very easy to find. If the students are really just repeating the information they find in a Venn diagram and in these comparisons, then I haven't done very much for them. I haven't really grown them, because it's very easy to find these facts. And I'm very familiar with the types of very low-level work that students attempt to do, or sometimes they'll do that right away, and then you're like, okay, well, we still have a week and a half of work to do. Is that all you have? What have you thought about that information? So a lot of it's going to go into me scaffolding and pushing them further and getting them to proficient, getting them even further to advanced. But if this is what is in their project, then I want them right away to be aware in the rubric that it's going to be considered emerging. It's not going to get them very far. And then the last one here, students can identify the correct definition of democracy. So it's a positive one. That's not a negative descriptor, but students should come to me at the beginning of the school year by 10th grade, which is typically, I have 10th graders that take this class. Sometimes I'll have some 11th graders, sometimes a 9th grader. But by the beginning of high school, typically students bring that knowledge with them. They've learned about democracy since elementary school, so I want them to be asking questions about that word, or telling me some things they know when we first launched this project. They might know that voting happens in a democracy, that people vote. So they might not have all the pieces, but this is going to be mostly prior knowledge. If they can tell me what democracy is, and if at the end of the project, that's all where they're at, then that's emerging. All right, let's go ahead and look at advanced here. So with advanced, I've pushed them farther, and it's not just pushing for the sake of pushing and doing more. It's about going deeper and showing understanding. And in order to show understanding, I want them to apply and transfer, because this is a very authentic project and it's very problem-based in the way I've designed it. Then it's their solutions, their proposals, this new document that's going to be a new constitution that implements these ideas from history, that's going to be the transfer of knowledge. And so let's look at number 9. Students propose a new constitution for our school with proposed changes to structures and procedures that improve student voice and participation while supporting student equity and rights. There's a lot in that descriptor. We're going to deconstruct that and break it apart and have questions and discussions. There's a lot we can do with a descriptor like this, because they can decide this proposal that this team is sharing today, because sometimes we'll have teams share where they're at. Did that give student voice? Did it improve the student voice from what it was before to this new proposal? Did it have opportunities to support equity between students? What does that really look like in the real world? How have our founding fathers done that? How did the people in Greece do that when they wanted more voice for the people? When their reforms happened, what did they do? And so if we can get them to implement that at our school, it's going to be tricky. I mean, this is hard. This is very hard to do. But it's going to be more relatable at school, right? And so if we're talking about historical events and historical people and historical changes and arguments that people have had to make these changes, it's very abstract. Social studies actually is very abstract, if you think about it. And we can take that and say, well, how can we do that in student council? How can we do what the Greek people started to do, that the Romans tweaked? What can we do about that here in our school? So this particular descriptor I really like. It's just super meaty. It's like we can chew on it. We can cut it up. We can talk about the vocabulary in it. We can do so many things with that, with the students. They can decide how much of it can you highlight. How uncomfortable does it make you feel? Do we know where we're going with that? And look at a lot of examples from history and from our school. Let's look at number 10. Each individual student describes a uniquely chosen historical figure whose actions inspired them due to their participation in supporting or changing their government. That descriptor was actually the last descriptor I wrote. I had already felt like I'd finished the rubric. I felt like it was good to go. And then I scrolled down here and we added these 2 rows here for you to reflect on your rubric when you finished it. So I did the same thing. So I went and reflected on my rubric and said, okay, well, let me see if my rubric falls into these sections. Is it developing? Is it proficient? Am I ready to go? Is it advanced? And so I felt that when I was checking just the first bullet, descriptors aligned to standards, I went back up and said, well, let me just check that. And so I went through and looked at my standards one by one and tried to figure out, are they actually having to do the level of the verb with that particular content? And on some of these, there's more to be done in scaffolding through the project and in different activities through the project. And sometimes a standard doesn't actually show up in the product, even though it helped to build up their knowledge for some of the other standards that do show up in the product and then are in the rubric. But this is the one I felt I had to think about quite a bit. The student is expected to describe how people have participated in supporting or changing their governments. For a while there, I thought, I don't think that can be shown in the product. How does you show that in the Constitution? But that's okay. We're still going to use that standard in this project because they're going to be looking at all the things that different people have done and who are those people and what have they done and what did they do in history. But then I realized what they're doing is actually going to have to be persuasive to an extent because they're proposing changes for our school. They're proposing different procedures, different guidelines in a constitution that everyone would have to abide by. So if they're doing that in this, it's a persuasive act, it's an act of persuading others, then it would actually support their argument to say, what we are doing is playing the role of the people who have framed our Constitution, of the framers of the Constitution. We're playing the role of some of these reformers, some of these political figures or activists in history. And here's one that really inspired me. And so that's where I said, hey, maybe we should add that into the rubric. And so I went ahead and added that here, where I'll reread it. Each individual student describes a uniquely chosen historical figure whose actions inspired them due to their participation in supporting or changing their government. That's the moment when each individual, so if I have 3 students in the group, typically I like 3, I might have a pair. If I have 3 students, each will have to pick from the different individuals that we've researched throughout the project to be able to feature and say, this particular individual has inspired me. They did this and this and this, and here is why they're inspirational. Okay. And they'll be able to describe what they did, what were their actions, and really say, hey, I'm walking in their shoes. I am playing the role of an active member of this community that is wanting change. And this is the change I want. All right, that's why I added number 10. Let's look at number 11. Presentation briefly explains which features from both Rome and Greece were borrowed or avoided for our school and why. So this is one of those descriptors that has them make decisions. Because a lot of times students just want to be told what to do. And they think, if I look at the rubric, I will just follow this, and then I'll ask my teacher, what did you mean here? So I can do exactly what you want me to do. But that's not what project-based learning is about. It's not about us telling them what to do and then them just doing it. It's about them making decisions. On occasion, it's about decisions. On occasion, it's about coming up with a solution and being able to make the case for that solution. In this case, there's a decision involved. I'm not telling them they have to implement everything that the Greeks had. I'm not telling them they have to implement everything that even our system of government has. They don't have to implement everything. There are going to be some things that they may choose not to implement. And so I left it open for them to make that case, but they have to be able to do that for all of these. And they have to be, it's the same features that I have over here that I already went through. And they have to be able to do that for both Greece and Rome, which means they will have to lay them out clearly and identify what were the differences between those two. And then take that and be able to say, ooh, this one over here, we'll take that, but we're not going to take this one over here because this idea is not going to fit. Our school maybe is too small for that. Or our school maybe is too big for that. Or student council is small enough, we can do that there. Maybe not for everyone, but we can do it within a smaller group. They can make decisions based on the information, which is going to help them retain the content because they're going to have to work through it, chew on it, make determinations based on the different characteristics. So that's going to allow them to really be pushed in terms of the content. Without a rubric item that makes decisions possible, where there are different avenues, they don't have a lot of voice as students and as learners. This is a descriptor that allows them to make decisions and have their own voice, be able to come up with something unique than maybe another group in the class, which is something your rubric you really should allow. All right, student-created constitution recommends the implementation of democratic ideas in at least 2 of these current school structures. So these are again, the different structures that I wanted them to look at: student council meetings, houses, which is like advisory, circle, parent involvement committee, and student clubs. And so once they know enough about those, because they've gathered their bits and pieces, found out what is the parent involvement committee, what do they do, so they do a little bit of preliminary research on those things. Once they do that, then they can actually kind of break them apart a little bit and suggest changes. And so they have to be able to do that in 2. If I only made them do it in 1, then there wouldn't be much to compare. It'd be harder for me to help them understand deeply if they didn't have 2 examples to compare one from the other, because it's going to be different. Okay, student clubs are very different than houses. They're 2 very different structures. Not everything you want to do in a student club can you suggest it for houses. It's going to have to be different. So I wanted them to do it for 2. 1 just would not give me a depth of understanding that I was happy with. And then at the same time, any more than 2 was almost not fitting for this, because I want them to have different products. They were going to have to pick different ones from different people and have a different hodgepodge of ideas so that they get a lot out of the presentations, because students really do learn from other groups, from the other group's thinking. I wanted that to happen here. And so the other thing is that we just, if they had to do more than those, we probably couldn't fit it in the amount of time we had for the project. So this project is about 2 to 3 weeks, 2.5 week project. And so I can extend it to 3 weeks, maybe a day more, but not much more than that. And so because of that, 2 was going to give me the biggest result here. And if I went back down here, I went through and just make sure I had done all of these pieces. So the exemplary column is asking for a deeper understanding, not just more information. And of course, I just went over why that was deeper learning, and they're more likely to retain the understanding than just giving information. There's a lot of decision making going on, different examples that they have to look at, different than some of the other teams, and so they can't just see another team's ideas and just take them. So there's a lot going on there. The descriptors aligned with standard, we talked about that, allows for student voice and choice, which is allowing for decision making and uniqueness of their products and of their presentations. It's structured to guide student learning. So the reason why it's written the way it is, because I want them to stop what they're doing, highlight. I want them to be able to pull words that they don't understand and ask in the need to knows. I want them to use these numbers to be able to say what they're talking. I'm talking about number 6, and that's, look, we're all working on number 6 right now, and help them do things with them and talk about the rubric and talk about the descriptors by having them numbered. I also have this in bold because I wanted them to be able to realize that it's not just about borrowing ideas, it's also about avoiding some ideas that didn't fit. And being able to defend that point and be able to explain that. So there's a lot going on for students to be guided, to guide their learning and their questions. The descriptors are qualitative and quantitative. So as you noticed, they have to have 6 or more of the historical vocabulary terms. They have to have at least 2 of these current school structures. This is the list of the structures that I want them to look at. So there are 5 structures we're looking at. And so there are some quantitative aspects to it. And then as far as qualitative, there are actually more qualitative descriptors in this rubric because of them having to decide whether they're going to borrow or avoid an idea. They're being able to make the case for improving student voice, and then also supporting student equity and rights, and really be able to figure out what do those words mean and how do we actually improve student voice. So they're going to have to decide that, and we're going to look at some examples where you really didn't improve the student voice, or you really didn't improve the voice of the community or the voice of the citizenry, and then some cases that really did, and be able to dig deeper into there. And then at the same time, in terms of quality, we have some qualitative pieces here. If this one here says that they did not have detail, they're really just taking dates, names, and concept terms and factoids versus having detail. And so that's where we're looking at quality versus quantity. Okay. So I've hit all of these rubric items. The one thing that I wanted to look at is the 21st century skills piece. I do have a rubric down here for it. So this is the rubric we were just looking at, and I scroll down, and then here is the 21st century skills rubric for this project. So I chose knowledge and thinking, and I chose agency. I think collaboration would be another great one. So typically we do 2 to 3 of these 21st century skills. And then just have some descriptors. I don't want to have too many more than this. So this is probably where I'm going to keep it. And I have done this project before, and I know how much knowledge and thinking goes into it. And then there's a lot of agency in it, especially under building relationships. So these descriptors I actually pulled from the New Tech Network Learning Outcome rubrics. I'm going to click here so you can see what I mean. So they have them separated out into elementary and secondary. And when it opens, we'll see that even within secondary, sometimes they break it down even further. So if I go into secondary for knowledge and thinking, they usually have up to 8th grade for middle school, just for secondary. And then they have up to 10th grade, and then they have up to 12th grade. So I'm going to go into social studies. They also have them by subject matter so that the language is specific or more relevant to your subject area. And so when I go into the one for 10th grade, it's actually the first one. See, there's a 10 right here. That one goes up to 12th grade, and that one goes for middle school up to 8th grade. These are the outcomes. So if you were a 6th grade teacher, you could look at the one for outcomes by 8th grade. And I looked at all of these rows. And so they have different ones: argument, thesis, claims and supporting ideas, counterclaims, evidence, and there's even more down here. So I went through all of them, and I felt that the most applicable one was the one for content. And so it says, what is the evidence that the student knows and can use accurate and relevant historical, social, scientific knowledge? And so I actually pulled these 3 columns for my rubric, and they're the same ones. I just pasted them into here. So I have historical, social, scientific content is absent or contains significant inaccuracies, would be emerging. Connections to particular historical, social science contexts absent, or proficient. Historical, social, scientific content is limited but accurate. Alludes to one relevant historical, social science context, which they definitely will if they're sticking to making the comparisons from ancient Roman Greece, and Judeo-Christian tradition, and then the American example, which is the one we're going to be looking at, and then our school's example. And then historical social scientific content is accurate and supports the arguments and thesis. So they are actually using the correct facts and details to support what they want to argue. Discusses at least one relevant context, historical, political, social, and cultural, which this is heavy on the political and social, but that's good. I'm definitely going to hit it. And then for agency, I did the same thing. I just went up here to the network rubrics, and then here's agency, and that for secondary brought up a rubric with also many, many, many rows. Let's go into here. I picked the high school one, and there's a middle school version. So for the high school one, I read through all the rows, and the one that I really felt applied to this project was about building relationships, not just with a friend, but building relationships in the school community. And so here it is, build relationships. So I pulled these 3 columns from that one. And again, these are just a resource. It's a good place to go and find good ideas for how to build up your students in terms of these different skills, helping them tackle and monitor learning. There were a few that I almost took for this rubric, but this one was the biggest one because they're going to have to research with the school community. They're going to have to figure out what is in my school, what is house, who makes decisions in house. Can I explain what house is? Can I explain what student council is? Can I explain what the parent involvement committee is, or what circle is and does? And so to do that, they were going to have to ask people. They were going to have to interview our dean. They were going to interview our principal, perhaps. They were going to send some emails out to student council members and student council officers, and maybe student council teachers. And they were going to have to ask different people different things. And so all of that going around just within their small school community is going to build relationships. So that's why I thought that one fit really well. And so I have for this emerging, does not initiate building relationships, but has few trusted adults or peers as needed to enhance learning. Or builds and uses relationships with trusted adults and peers as needed to enhance learning, or actively builds trusting relationships with adults and peers to pursue goals, enhance learning, and get back on track as needed. And because they were going to have to reach out so much, and when I did this project in this same way, I did this project once. I've done a project like it in different ways, but this example I went through once already, and I realized how much more connected they felt at the end of the project, just with the leadership on campus, with the different programs that we have on campus and the different activities and student opportunities. They were just so much more aware of them, and it just built up their own agency for themselves and as actors on campus, as active students. So that was great. So that pretty much closes the whole section of the rubric for content and the rubric for 21st century skills. So hopefully this helps you as a social studies example.